Welcome, everybody, to the Zion Experience. I'm Jim Shaw. I forget Jordan. Jordan Frank, the other co-host, is on.
I'm here.
You know, we really don't prepare for this.
You know, we're better off to come. That's about all you're going to get. Yeah, that's what I got.
I have ham and cheese loaf in the refrigerator for days like today.
With that, let's get back into it.
Let's get in our groove. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Zion Experience, or we call it the TZE, and we've got a special guest today, Aron Kolosik. I don't think I messed his name up. We practiced this right before we got on, but let me give you a little background about Aron, and just if you'll notice, we've got a special guest today, Drew Eubank, that's joining us as well, and then our regular other host, Jordan Frank, and then myself, one of your other hosts, Jimmy Shaw. So let me tell you a little bit about Aron, and I hope you all get to know Aron today as we've gotten to know him. And just there's people that come into your life that you just want to get to know more, and Aron's one of those people. So Aron is a passionate leader dedicated to achieving exceptional results in both business and life. He is currently the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Central Garden and Pet. So he's part of that C-suite, one of our customers that we work with and really enjoy working with. And he excels in empowering teams, simplifying processes, and driving innovation to achieve remarkable outcomes. Personally, and this is where I'm most excited to talk to Aron about, is he's committed to growth and to inspire those around him. He's a devoted follower of Christ. He's a husband and he's a father. Aron draws strength from his family and his faith, and he also serves as a coach through his program, which he calls the Unstuck Master Plan, which applies his business and life lessons to promote holistic growth. Aron shares valuable insights on LinkedIn, his podcast, and social media to challenge thinking and foster impactful connections. He is eager to connect and elevate others to new heights. So in a short way to introduce Aron, he's just a good dude that has he is a C-suite executive, but he's in a point in his life where he's just being an inspiration for others. And Aron, welcome to the Zion Experience. We're glad to have you. I know I messed up the intro a little bit. We're doing things a little different with our intro. So we had a moment of silence for about 1 minute and 10 seconds, and everybody was just staring at me. And then finally somebody broke and said, "Is Jimmy frozen?" And no, Jimmy just didn't follow instructions real well this morning. So Aron, welcome to the show, man. We're glad to have you. And how did we do introducing you? Did we leave anything out?
No, I mean, it's humbling, right? You think through your life, you think through who you would want to be described as. And, you know, I got a little emotional when you think through like what's really important to you. And like you hit all the things. And it's not just, I think oftentimes we get looked at as a title on LinkedIn, and like we're all more than that, right? I mean, we're so much more, and that's what I hope to live up to, right? So sometimes it's a title and sometimes it's an explanation. You're like, man, hope I live up to that. But that's the journey, right? Like that's our journey, is just continuing to learn and grow. And thanks for the introduction. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. And I think you hit it well. It's like this is going back a few years here. When we started Zion, we really had to associate. So 3 of the 4 owners of Zion are Drew, Jordan, and myself. And we had a lot of people knew us, but they didn't necessarily know Zion. So we had to have a lot of intro calls, and it was new for a lot of people. And we had to describe ourselves. And so I finally came up with, how do you describe yourself? How do you best and accurately describe yourself? And I came up with four little statements. It's faith, family, doing work worth doing, and a good adventure. And it's kind of similar to what you just said. It's like, man, I hope I live up to those things. I hope people see that in action through me, and they're not just words that are, you know, empty words. And I think when you get to yours and when I read it, it's like a devoted follower of Christ. You're a husband and you're a father, and then you're trying to, you know, you're drawing strength from your family and your faith, and you want to be an inspiration. And so what better way to describe who you are? Yeah, you got a title. Yes, you have an important function at your job. There's no doubt about that. But there's so much more to life, and I think that's where we we transition. You know, you obviously have a lot of work experience, Aaron.
Yeah.
You got a lot of professional experience, but in specifically the supply chain, but you've kind of branched out here. You've got 19 episodes, I believe I counted that right, of the Unstuck podcast. You've got the Unstuck master plan, I think it's 7 questions, an assessment of asking, you know, where are you in terms of your health, your spirituality, your family, how are you with money, and just, you can talk about that a little bit more. But what created this pivot in your life? Maybe it's not a pivot. Maybe it's you've been working towards this, and now you've just kind of made it a production. You made it a product. You've made it something that's people can access at scale.
Yeah, it's been a journey. I started this journey a little over 20 years ago when I first took an assessment similar to what I've created now for myself. I was actually a young engineer working at P&G in a factory in Iowa City. So I was working at a plant, and I needed extra money. And so I was working on direct marketing. So I was selling nutritional supplements. And so I was doing Advocare, you know, Spark energy drink. I drank a lot of that through the years. And, you know, I went to a conference, and it was called Designing Your Future. And in this conference, it asked me a couple questions about where I was at in my life. And it exposed in my life at the time that it asked me to look at my physical health, which I'm like, I'm in pretty good shape. And asked me to look at my career financially. I'm like, oh, that's pretty good. But then I said, where are you at with your family and where are you at spiritually? And I was like, whoa. Spiritually, I was probably a 2 out of 10. Like, I had really pushed far away from God. I just had a complete misunderstanding of what it means to be in relationship with the Father, with our Creator. And I looked at it as judge and jury, and I just didn't want any part of it. But I realized in that moment that I needed to do something different like that. And so that kind of set me off on a trajectory. That was the first pivot. And then if you flash forward 25 years, you know, here I am, like almost 50. Next year I'll turn 50. And I kind of had achieved everything I'd wanted to do coming out of school, right? Like, I mean, in my role, unless if I switch functions, like I'm at the top of the game at a $3 billion plus company. I love what I do. I love the people I work with. I love the changes that we're making, and it's not easy, but that's worth it. But I still felt a little empty, Jim. Like, I just felt like there was something missing inside. And I took a course, and what it helped me realize was, like, where I'm most passionate is when I see the young individuals that I'm working with, like, light on fire, right? Where they take something that they didn't think was possible and they become more, and they present and share. You know, we've got a young man, I'm just thinking through him down in Covington, Georgia. His name's Jake Dickens. Like, Jake Dickens, when Jake Dickens becomes the next level, like, that's what excites me. And I realized that I have these tools and processes that I'd gathered over 20 years, right? 20 years I've been putting together this program, using it in my life. And I'm like, wow, that's what I need to share. And so basically at that point, I was like, okay, I need to now share this. And it fills a gap that I just didn't know I needed. Right. And to help others see things differently. And so that's kind of how it pivoted to turn it into an actual program. It's been fun. It's been a journey for sure. Right. Like, just like you and I talked, like, putting the title podcast host on your name. Like, I would have never envisioned that was something part of my life. Right. Like, that just wasn't it. But here we are. I'm just being obedient and following what gets opened up for me.
That's pretty awesome. What so take us through the journey of Unstuck podcast, and just give the people that may not have been exposed to it yet. You started it in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago, or
so
kind of walk us through that. And
we went live in May with the podcast, and you're right. So tomorrow will be episode 20, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? Like, I'm like, wow, 20 episodes every week I've been on it. But really it's an outcome of the broader piece of it, Jim. Like, it's more of the desire to help people see things differently in terms of unstuck. And I think we all get stuck at times in our life, right? There's moments, and frankly, we don't even know it. Sometimes it just means you're stuck on autopilot. Like, you're just on cruise control and you're like, no, there's more. It's so easy to get comfortable. And I had got stuck a couple of times in my life, and I'd had tools, and I just really had that desire to share. And so the podcast became an output of that. It became an avenue for me to provide something for free that people can go out and listen to and really just challenge their thinking. You know, it's crazy when you think about a 15 to 20 minute episode when your son's texting you saying, "Hey dad, I don't hate your voice." You know, like you're like, "Oh, that's not a bad thing," right? You're like, "Okay, at least my 22-year-old son doesn't think I'm absolute," you know, in the context of listening to Joe Rogan or Theo Vaughn or something like that. Like, you know, he finds room to put dad on the radio or whatever, you know, listen to the phone. But so yeah, it's just an opportunity for me to share some of the details that I can give you the material for the Unstuck master plan, which we can cover, but I can fill in the gaps and tell my story. Because I think that's probably the biggest impact for me is letting people know that, like you said earlier, like I'm just a dude, like who loves college football, who likes to do crazy things, like challenge myself to do more, who likes spending time with his family. And that's just as important to me as the C-suite piece of it. Right. And so telling the stories of like, no, it's not always been easy. Like, I think that's the biggest piece that I'm most passionate about, Jim, is like helping people understand that, like, I go through stuff too. Right. Like there's moments that I don't want to do work, you know, like there's moments where I'm like, I don't think I've got this all figured out. There's moments when I've made mistakes and I've, you know, failed and went the wrong path and had to get it back. Like, I think people need to hear those stories from folks in my role, because I feel like sometimes it's the, you know, the perfect, oh, everything went perfectly. Well, that's not real. And so I just want people to hear that I'm a real dude.
That's a very powerful statement there. How do you take that and push that to your team professional? Right? Like, how do you push down, like, guys, we may fail, but let's try something. How do we take calculated risk? Let's not, and it's okay if we don't feel good about it and we have to pivot. How do you get that feeling down to your teams?
Yeah, I just, you know, I don't know, plus 20 years ago, I read a book by John Maxwell called Failing Forward. And I've really lived that. I think if you have guardrails and checks and balances in your system, like, you can fail. You know, we just want to make sure that we don't fail like catastrophically, right? Like, you know, we're going to do stuff, and if we have good controls and you check and balance it, and I think that's part of the piece. It's like step 7 of the Unstuck master plan is like the checks and balances. Like, you can go off down the path, but you better make sure that you're checking that it's working. And if it gets too far off, it's like that micro adjustment, like you can adjust it back. It's when you like don't look at it for 3 months and you're like, how's it going? And then all of a sudden it's a disaster. And I think that's with the team. Like, we should try to do things. And if they're sounded in good principles, we'll figure it out. We've got a talented team. Like, if you have a talented team that's like committed to the outcome, then you got to let them like let it go.
You say all the time, Drew's got a statement is, you're going to stub your toe. Just move the chair. And we got statements like fail fast. And we try to embody that. And I think it's, you know what I think is really cool about you, Aaron, is when we started this podcast, we had a vision, but it really wasn't a vision to be like, let's just be a business podcast. And Jordan and myself and Drew, we share responsibilities, and it similar to your path is never really saw ourselves being a podcast. Don't know that we are really a good podcast host. You know, I don't know how many people enjoy hearing my voice, but one thing we found is that when we get people on, it's the inspiration behind it. And so what we try to share is just a little bit of our methodology of how we go about being good partners, how we go about being, you know, developing a culture. Because when you reboot a company and you get to start it from fresh, you can put everything on the wall that worked really good, and you know the things that maybe you had to learn from that you got stuck in a long time ago. And it's been a real cool journey and a real cool process to say we've got a good mix of younger professionals and we've got a good mix of older professionals. And it's just, that's what I get inspiration and passion out of. I'm probably less concerned about the true business and the traditional business metrics. We always say is, if you take care of your people, you take care of your partners, and you have the ability to work with good customers. We can't always choose our customers, but when you can work with good customers like Central Garden and Pet, it's like the finances and all the other stuff that make a good, sustainable, healthy business, they all work together. But
No, it makes
part
a
of
ton
that
sense.
is this rambling way of getting back to what Drew was asking you is like, you gotta turn your team loose. You have to let them find their way within guidelines. Like you got to give them direction and go, and you're going to make mistakes. You're going to fail.
Sure.
Just fail fast and learn from it.
And it's always the first question.
You're not scared to make a mistake.
I mean, I've got 2 boys. They're 22 and 20, right? The oldest one will be 23 this fall. I oftentimes find myself, checking myself because I'm like, I need to let them fail. Like, because you don't want your children to fail. You don't want them to get hurt. You don't want these things to happen, but you kind of got to let them, right? It's a conversation of, used to look at their grades, when they were younger. Like I'd look in this, look and see what their grades were. Well, 2, it created stress for me that was undue. And 2, they got to figure it out. Like at some point they got to figure it out in order to become the men that they're supposed to be. And if I am constantly smothering that and not letting that grow, they'll never become the men they're supposed to be. Same thing with the people we work with. Right. And that was one of the things that I loved about coming to Central Garden and Pet was similar to you guys. Like I was with the company for a long time. I was with P&G for almost 23 years, 23. I'm like, wow, that's a long time. But I learned a lot. And coming to Central, it allows me to creatively use what I've learned, right? It's not a go direct re-apply because we're 2 completely different companies. In fact, as you guys know, we're like more like 10 or 12 companies, but that's cool. Like it's a cool problem to solve. Like I like solving tough problems. But we get that background in the education and things that worked. And then like what you kind of said made me think about was, man, I don't have to do anything I don't want to. Right. In the old system, I had to do all these other things. Now we can go do what we want to do, which is incredibly freeing for me. So I appreciate that. And that just kind of reminded me of one of the reasons why I came to Central is that freedom.
Yeah. We said, it's like, if I spent one of the things I said pretty emphatically we were all previously working together at another systems integrator, and we had a life event. There's no denying we had a life event, and the door was open. I firmly believe God opened that door, and I'd have never walked through that door if God hadn't opened it for me and, hadn't pushed me through it. I can't speak for Drew and Jordan, but they probably feel similar. And it's like, I want to spend the rest of my life working with good, and I said it earlier, good people, good partners, and helping good customers. If Absolutely. I do that, that's a good day. And there's something freeing. I don't know that it's really, I wasn't stuck in that, but sure. You look back and you were in bondage. You did have change. You were in debt. You were down a path that it would have been hard to get out. I was on a train that was going 70 miles an hour that 86 to 100 families depended on us to stay on that train. I would have never got off of it. And to be able to reboot that and do what you want to do, it's kind of freeing. It's a little scary.
For sure.
I don't know. It's like I'm an engineer, and Drew's wired like an engineer, maybe not formally trained engineer. Jordan thinks like an engineer, but we're all kind of like, it's that unknown's a little, it's like doing something for the first time, and you're not quite sure, but you just keep moving forward. And one thing, I ramble too much sometimes, Aaron, but I was thinking when you said, it's like we all take ourselves way too serious. When you were talking about your podcast and you never thought you'd be a podcast host, we all are our biggest, or at least I am. I don't speak for everybody else when I say this, because everybody feels different sometimes, but I think we take ourselves too serious and we worry too much about what others might think about you and how that sounded, or is somebody going to get offended? And part of that's just societal pressure that's come in. Sure. And from an early age, you're taught to conform and to be, I don't want to call it a sheep, but conform and be like everybody else and walk in the line and don't talk out of line. I've always been the exact opposite. I can't pay attention longer than 20 minutes or so. I've probably got some clinical ADHD or something. And I've always been kind of the outlier in terms of how I think, my voice, what I think. And I've learned in the last probably 2 to 3 years, and it's I'll be 44 this year, Aaron, so a little bit behind. You've got 4 kids, but I've learned it's like, let your voice be out there. Let judgment. There's one judge in my life, and there's a group of people around me that I do care about their opinion, and the rest of them, it's like they're going to feel the way they feel. But to let your voice out and to do something scary, as long as you're doing it in an authentic manner and you're doing it with good intentions, it's like I think I think it's going to work out. That's my philosophy right now at 44 years of age, or soon to be 44 years of age. And you reminded me of that a little bit. It's like I do a lot of posting on LinkedIn. We do a lot of things different in how we manage and run Zion. It's like, it's okay. There's who sets the rules? Well, you get to. And
I think that's it's, when I started down this path, I was of course nervous, right? And because I do have a role and I do represent the company, and I want to make sure I represent them the best way. And at the same time, like, I do have a voice, and I've seen things and experiences that I personally experienced that I just don't want others to have to go through. Like, I really want you to think about it. And, that experience led me to go to Switzerland in 2020, to take a promotion, which was awesome, but it put me at risk with my family. Right. It, like, I can't say that it like almost broke our family, but if I would have kept in that path, it for sure would have broke our family. And to your point, that was a life event that occurred. And I did that because I thought I had to, right? Like, in my mind, the stories, and that's, one of the principles that I teach, which is like, your stories determine your outcome. Like, whatever you tell yourself, like, that's your constraining story. Sometimes that's a story that keeps you in bondage. And my story at that time was, I don't know if I can be successful outside of P&G. I mean, it's 20 something years in the company. I tried to do the direct marketing. That didn't work. Well, that's not what the plan God had for me. But, at the time I was like, well, I can't do that. And that moment occurred where I knew that it was just time to go. Like, there's moments in life where that you're like, it's time to go. And that happened for me in Switzerland. And there was a couple awesome God events where, it's super cool. Like, in the morning, I'm like, is this really what I want to do? And the scripture came up, and it was about Peter getting out of the boat. Like, there's a moment, where Peter got out of the boat, and everybody talks about how Peter didn't have the faith and he sunk. And I'm like, dudes, he got out of the freaking boat. Like, to try to walk on water. Like, which one of us on this call has the guts to actually get out there and try to walk on water? Like, first of all, like, that took a lot of guts. And second of all, like, the story was not about that. It was the fact that he did get out, and the fact that no matter when we get out of the boat and we follow, he's going to reach down and grab us. And that morning I read that scripture, and it was on my heart. I sent a text message out to a group of men that I send a text message to every day. Like, just, here's my thoughts for today. Get it out there. In the beginning, to your point, Jim, I felt like weird about that, but I'm like, no, this is what's on my heart. And later that afternoon, I was going to go for a run. I was training for something. And I put on a YouTube video of a church I was going to in Iowa. And this young woman got on there and said, hey, the first service, I didn't say this, but here in the second service, like, I feel like I have to say this. And this is announcements. And normally I skip the announcements, right? Like, I skip the announcements, go straight to the sermon, listen to that. But for some reason today, I listened to the note. And she said, so there's somebody out there right now that needs to get out of the boat. And I was putting on my headphones, and in that moment, you're just like, boom. Like, literally, I just texted these guys in the morning, and then here is this woman thousands of miles away saying that I need to get out of the boat. And it's in those moments where you're like, okay, it's time to get out of the boat. Like, you have to borrow that courage sometime from God. Like, he tells us to us, but it's like, I'm sure he'd probably told me like 20 times before, but that moment he's like, dude, I really need you to hear it today. And I was like, okay, I got it. Like, but those life events are important. And sometimes we need those like prompts to get out of the boat. It's not like we always come to it on our own. And, and the other piece of that is part of it is I had been in a group of men, and that's part of what and it's not men, it's men and women, but in the Unstuck Master Plan, like, I create an environment where we can learn from each other and push each other, because oftentimes we can't solve that problem with our current way of thinking, right? Einstein has this whole quote about like, you can't solve the problem with the same thinking that got you there. Like, sometimes you got to have somebody else tell you to solve the problem. Because what I was trying to solve at the time was work-life balance. We're living in Switzerland with a boss that was sending me 50 or 60 emails a day and supporting the entire globe. I had an international role where I was supporting Asia and Europe and South America. And so there was no end to the emails. There was no end to the text, like it was just almost impossible to do. And I was trying to solve it, like with systems and processes and getting more efficient. And finally, the guy said to me, "You deserve to be happy." And I'm like, "I do?" Like, I thought we're just supposed to like work hard, and they're like, "No, you actually deserve to be happy." And I'm like, "Oh, so I can choose to do something different to create happiness and fulfillment in my life than what I'm currently doing." Yes, you can. And I'm like, "Oh," because I don't know that I would have ever got to that conclusion directly on my own if somebody like you guys wouldn't have said to me, "Aaron, what the heck is the matter with you? Like, you're trying to solve this problem. You can't change the behaviors that are creating it for you. So you have to make a choice." And that's one of the things I'm passionate about with helping people understand is like they can unlock a new story. Like the fact that I deserve to be happy was a new story for me. The fact that I could find something outside of P&G at the time was a new story to me. I wasn't angry at anybody at P&G. I love P&G. Like I still, have tons of friends there and would never trade it for the world, but it was just time for me. And opening up those stories is so important. Sometimes you just can't do it on your own.
Yeah, that's I love that story. So guys, I'm doing all the talking. I know y'all can jump in at any time and I'd sit here and talk for another 20 minutes directly on it. But Jordan, Drew, you all got any questions you want to drop in?
No, that story is powerful because we just went through as Jimmy said, we started the company. We really focused on who we are, who we want to be in our culture. And then we started a business operating system at the beginning of the year. It's called Pinnacle. And they made us rethink our core values. And one of our core values is better together. And that doesn't mean we're always walking lockstep. It just means together we can solve anything. We can get through any challenge. Right.
Yeah.
And we're better connected, better together. And, Jimmy talks about the young teammates we have on the team. We've got 5 teammates under 26 years old. I think we've got 8 under 30 out of 26. It's a pretty big, big chunk. Part of that is the wonderment of those young teammates and their attitude and aptitude. And somebody asked me, "What skills do I need?" If you have attitude and aptitude, we go a long way with everything else, right? That's a true
absolutely.
But I also tell them, when you watch these people who say they work from home and do all this stuff, they're not connected, and people get tired. They don't go to the office every day and see everybody. It's very hard. So it's important, especially when you're young in your career, to be around other professionals to help you guide you through those things, right? To help you guide through those challenges, to start gaining wisdom. Because I know when I was 27 years old, I had zero. I could work,
for sure.
my butt off, right?
Yeah.
I can work my butt off, but I can work my way out of most problems, but my wisdom level was low. It's probably still fairly low, but it's not as low as it was. I know I'm above my floor, which is good. So that story just reminds me kind of where I was, because I was in a similar situation back at UPS. Back in the day, I never said no to anything. I spent 9 months away from my family.
No.
And never once said no. Traveled 48 out of 52 weeks a year because it was the right thing to do. And my team needed it, but mama needed it at home too. And so that's been one of the blessings we have here is I'm going to fly home late tonight. My son has a football game tomorrow. I'm not missing it. I will never miss that. That's priority number one. So those boundaries have been, to your point, freeing in a lot of ways, right? It's a different stress, but it's a freeing stress because for that 2 hours, the phone's in my pockets, I don't care what else happens. I am focused. I'm locked in.
Yeah. I think it's important. And that was the thing that kind of killed me was my family's always been important. My dad installed in me, like, never miss a game. Like he still thinks about one game that he missed years ago. And I got in when I was a sophomore or something, or freshman, I think, playing varsity, and he instilled like, that's important to me. And I had never I missed a couple games my son's freshman year of high school when we were moving from Phoenix back here to Ohio. And, I watched it, live, I streamed it but it wasn't the same. But then I moved to Switzerland and my son was playing college football. And I'm like, how am I going to make this work? And that was another thing that just made me make that choice. It was another thing that just was like, man, I do not want to miss any one of his games. And I didn't, right? So I made that move. I took 9 weeks off of work in between P&G and coming on with Central, went to several games and didn't miss any games. But I think, one of the things he asked me was, how do I do the balance? Like, one of the things that I feel like people that I try to talk to people about a lot is like this point of being present. Right, Drew, you mentioned it. Your phone's in your pocket. Like, we are an interconnected world today, and the phone never stops. The email never stops. The needs of others never stop. But as a leader, your job is to set a course of direction. And so if I don't stop, even from a personal business leadership perspective, if I don't stop and create thinking time, it's a problem, right? Because I'll never forget, I would drive into Phoenix, into the plant, and I refused to look at my email on that drive into Phoenix. I was South Phoenix, a 30-minute drive in the morning, hour at night, coming home. But that 30 minutes in the morning, it was thinking time. And I'd always go into the guy at the office and say, hey, man, I was thinking about this on the way in. But if I had opened up my phone and looked at that email, all of a sudden my thinking would have been other people's thinking, right? And so I need to create space from a business perspective to be present. And then also from a family perspective where, like, I don't look at emails after 6 o'clock at night anymore. Used to be that I do emails on the couch watching TV with my wife and blah, 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 blah. Not anymore. Like, I just don't look at them until the morning and I batch it, right? It's because at the end of the day, like, if somebody really needs stuff from me, they know how to get a hold of me. Like, that's the fact. Like, they can text me, they can call me if it's urgent. When have you ever accepted, well, I sent you an email on this as an acceptable answer of, like, I tried to get a hold of you? like never. So, like, we can actually have that power. And so I don't send emails to teammates on weekends. Doesn't mean I don't do emails on weekends, because sometimes Saturday mornings, everybody's asleep. I'm like, this is a perfect time for me to knock some stuff out. But I have this little thing called option delay delivery on Microsoft Outlook. Now
it's wonderful.
It's wonderful. They might get frustrated with me because they get 10 emails first thing Monday morning, but
right.
But at least I'm not creating an environment that says, well, the boss is asking me to do this. You're asking me this email, so I need to respond. Just being present, Drew, that's so important. Like, wherever you're at right now, right here, it's just us and you guys and me. Like, I don't really think about anything else. And I truly try to create headspace for that, of being present, whether it be at dinner, whether it be at a football game, whether it be date night with my wife. That's why I like golf, because I can't think of anything except for the next shot, because I'm taking a lot of shots out there on the course. But that's good advice, that being present, not missing events. Your kids will never forget that, right? They just don't forget Dad was there, and they know how busy you are. They know how busy you are. They know that you're making sacrifices to be there, and they appreciate it more than you guys know. I can tell you, with the almost 23-year-old, like, our conversations are different, because we spent that time together. We've spent time. I remember I was actually sitting at this desk, and he was sitting right over here next to me, and it was New Year's 2022. And the CEO at the time called me, and he said, hey, what you doing? I said, well, I'm actually sitting down with my son, and we're, like, setting our game plan for 2022 out. And he's like, I'd give anything in the world to be sitting with my son, game planning our year for next year. I'm like, well, that's because I've been intentional about that, right? Like, intentional about sharing and being vulnerable. Like, I'm vulnerable with my kids when things aren't working for me. Like, I tell them, like, man, I'm frustrated with this. I don't bear everything. Like, our family members, I think that's a trick too. Like, I think some people share everything with their wives or their spouses or whatever. They cannot bear the same burden that you can, and they don't understand it. And so it doesn't mean that we shouldn't share some things, like, again, whatever you're prompted to do. But when you're feeling weak, say that you're feeling weak. When you're feeling tired, say that you're feeling tired. When you're feeling, like, you should share those things with your family. They need to see that Dad is a real person, right? I just think somehow we create these facades of, like, we're perfect human beings, and we're not perfect human beings. We're not. And as soon as we think our kids, they can never live up to that, and I think it's the same way at work. We're like, hey, I'm vulnerable with folks. I make mistakes. I admit it. And if you would admit that you made a mistake, or that you should have did something different, it's kind of disarming. Right? What can they do? And I think we need more of that in the workplace. That's one of the things I try to help people understand. Like, be you. It's good enough. Like being you is good enough.
Yeah, I was going to jump in there and just say the exact those same words were like, man, when you really show up as you, that's easy. It's easy to be you, right?
There's no hiding.
You have to. It's you said it best. Like you can't, even with whether it's your family or your team or like sometimes people can't handle all of you because some of us are special and we got, we got.
I'm a lot. I get it.
You got to have emotional intelligence. We just did an emotional intelligence, and I don't know what few people weren't really crazy about it, but like emotional intelligence to me is the ability to be in an environment and be what you need for the people that need you to be that. Simple as that. And recognize whether it's your family, whether it's your team, whether it's a customer. It's like you can't be all of you, but you can't. Too many people at work, I think, are a masquerade. I think they're a facade of what they really are, and they're doing what they think they should do instead of just who they are and being authentic. And
yeah, I think that it's important to me that whether or not I'm in a boardroom, whether I'm out in the warehouse with you guys, whether I'm at the backyard with my friends, like I'm the same guy.
Yes.
Period.
Yes.
Like you're not going to see anything different because I don't have energy to determine which role I'm playing, right? Like I just need to be me. Yeah. Does my language change? I mean, just my wife and I listened to our church's sermon last night, and he was talking about Paul and how his language changed based on who he was talking to. Like he became all things to all people. So, but it's still you, right? You're just not revealing all parts of you all the time, right? You don't reveal the strategic conversation at the fire pit on a Friday night, with a good bourbon, like it's a different conversation, but it's still you.
Right.
And like, there's no catching anything different if it's just you.
Right.
And I think that's super important. And that's, you asked me, that's also one of the principles of the core 5 was we have to live by code by telling the truth and just by being real. Oftentimes we don't know. We're afraid to say where we're really at, right? Like what's really working, what's really not working. Like people, we don't want to see it. We don't want to be exposed to it. And that's why I created the assessment online, those 8 questions, because I want people to like, in a free way, look at it and just go look at it and say, for 5 minutes, I can get a quick exposure to where I'm really at. Right. And I'm not sharing it with anybody else. It's just you, the score, and, and God looking at the score going, this really isn't working. Because oftentimes we don't want to do that. We put up that facade like, oh, I'm in good shape. I'm like, yeah, but I eat horribly and I'm, drinking at night and blah, 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 all these things. Only you know that that's true. And so for you to come to grips with where you're at. And then the second piece of it is what we really want. Oftentimes people don't say what they really want. They're afraid. To your point, like this conformity, you mentioned it like back in the beginning of this conversation of conformity. Like,
right.
Man, when somebody I grew up, my hometown, 1,000 people. 1,000 people. So 40 people in my high school class. Loved every minute of it. But at the same time, there is this piece of like, if you do something that's outside the norm, if you wear Bugle Boy pants that my mom somehow picked up for me somewhere, like I was outside. I mean, it was like, what the heck are you doing wearing those? Like it's like you're created, like we are conditioned to stay in the norm. So then we sometimes just don't say what we really want. Like, because you're like, well, if I say that, then people are going to judge me. I'm like, but if God put that on your heart, then you got to go for it and you got to share it and put it out there in the world. Because I think if you don't put it out there in the world, it doesn't happen. I really, really believe that once you share to the world what you want to do and let God kind of take control of it, it'll start to happen. But if you keep it down inside and you don't ever share who you really are or what you really want and dream, I mean, guys, I think we have an epidemic of people not dreaming. Like when I ask people that come through the program sometimes or through one of the courses, like list a bunch of things that you dream about, all the things you want. Some people can barely list like 5 or 6. And I'm like, man, I could list all kinds of things, like I could go on. That's one of the things that class taught me 20 years ago was like, what is it that I want that I don't have? And Ayla and I did that. We went on a retreat, the two of us, her and I went for 2 days and we looked across our physical health. We looked across our spiritual health. We looked across our relationship, our family, and what we wanted financially in our career. And we said, what do we want? And we just listed it all out. And I still have that Word document from 20 plus years ago, September 2001. And it's powerful because I can share with my kids, like, these are the things that I thought about back then. And then there was a list of things that we had that we didn't want, right? Like there's other things that you have that you don't want: debt, extra weight. And, like there's just like sour or broken relationships that you have that you're like, man, this is like a drag. I do not want to be carrying this along for years. And just getting clear with those things is such a huge thing. Like I would just encourage anybody that's listening to like do that exercise, make your dream list, and then make your list of what you don't want. Because once you start with that, then you can start to go, okay, now where am I going? Like when you think about your team, like you redid your values, but also get clear on your vision, right? Like, what do you want? What do you guys want to be when you grow up? Without that, where are you going? Like it's that North Star. And if you don't have that in your personal life on every area of your life, like it's not going to happen.
Right. I'm a firm believer you got to have a purpose, whether it's at work or whether it's at home or whatever. If you don't, you're aimlessly wandering around in the world as it is designed if you don't have a purpose. And
absolutely.
I think a lot of people are not, I don't know that people are scared. It's just the realization of putting it on paper, and then just there's something powerful about taking it and thinking about it and putting it down. You think about, we get up, we work, or we go to school, but we never really stop and think, what's my purpose and what do I want to be? And it sounds almost too simplistic, but I think a lot of families don't do that. We've been through now 2 strategic, external, third-party led strategic exercises in the last, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And I'm like, it hit my wife's Holly, and I told Holly, I was like, when have we sat down and said, like, it's not business, but what's our purpose? What do we stand for? What do we want to be? And then, how do we start doing it? And so we did it. I don't know that it's formalized for my family, but it's
I think
it's the same principles, and there's power in writing it down, and there's power in saying, I think knowing, to use your podcast and your plan is to get unstuck. Like if you're not where you are or want to be today, the beauty of living where we do with the freedoms that we have is change it tomorrow.
For sure.
It's going to be scary. It might be totally out of your comfort zone, but somebody out there maybe today is listening to this and they're inspired by this conversation with you, Aron. And it's like, you can change it today. You're a decision away from changing what your future is, what your reality is, what your family's life is, what your personal life is, what your financial, your health, whatever. Start today. Just to start. And, I think this, oftentimes people get a little bit hung up with, well, I'm not stuck. Well, you might be bored. That might be another word sometimes where you're like, I'm bored. And so you're creating all these other things to like create joy in your life. And you're bored because you don't have that purpose, to your point, Jim. Like if you don't have that purpose, you may just get bored and you're just going on with life, and you end up doing some things to try to fill that gap in the wrong way. And of course, as a believer, I feel like Christ is the starting point of that. But I also feel like there's a piece that as a Christian, we need to go deeper. Like, how do you live that life, the Spirit-led life? And like, well, how come I'm a Christian and I believe and all these things are still happening? Well, like, what do we got to go do? Part of it's just the world. And then part of it is like that continuous conversation with God. I think the other thing I find with folks that I work with is we do a lot of praying as Christians, a lot of praying. God, please bring this to happen. Let's make Zion a huge business. Zion Solutions Group, huge business. Let's make it big. But how much listening are you doing to God? When he says, go left, get out of the boat. Like we got to create that space to listen to God, like actual still quiet voice. I have this vision of, when Jesus went into the desert or when he, was in the garden, he's doing a lot of listening. There was certainly some praying, but he's doing a lot of listening. And it doesn't have to be perfect, to your point. It's like not a huge shift all the time. I think sometimes we get hung up in vision and purpose, and I've been through a billion of these things. And
like I get caught up in perfecting the language associated with it, right? It feels very like clunky. But man, I just want a family that loves each other, that lives together, and that makes an impact, right? Like just simple stuff, right? Like I just want us to like enjoy being together. Like that's a big mission for me, like to continue to work on that. Like I want my kids to choose to be near us or hang with us. Like that's part of the journey, right? Like I'm going to love my parents, but that's not certainly part of my relationship with them. But I started with that as intentionality. I think that's the other word that I would share as like, for me, intentionality. There is nothing that I do, and I get that I'm extreme in some ways, but most everything I do is intentional. Even rest, right, is intentional. Like I've had to learn that through the years. Like we talk about work-life balance, which I think is almost it's impossible. It's more like work-life harmony that needs to happen, because balance is a word that, how do you define balance? Like when somebody says, well, I worked 42 hours, I'm good, or what, like that's not, we need to find harmony in the work that we do. Like, and like for me, college game day on Saturday, like is like, I love it. Like, so I don't do anything on Saturdays. It's my Sabbath. Like I am like literally, I'll get up in the morning, do my morning routine and knock some things out in the morning. But man, listening to the game day, like that is like brings me joy. I watched I went to school at Iowa State. They kicked a 54-yard field goal last weekend to win the game in the last 6 seconds. Like I jumped in the pool crazy, afterwards, right? It was like that brings me joy. And for years in my life, I felt like I couldn't do that because I was trying to build. To your point, Drew, earlier, like work. I'm like, no, actually that lets my brain rest. Like our brains need rest, and it allows me to experience creativity and joy. And I want every aspect of me firing when I turn on the central hat, right? I want every aspect of me firing. And if I'm not letting joy into my life, then every aspect is not there. Like we got to create that space. For you, it might be going out on the, with a bow or a rifle, it might be something different, but that's the joy that you need to have, and you need to build space for it. And I feel like this might be my last rant, but when I used to work with people that would tell me, oh, I don't take my vacation, I thought that was cool back in the day. And now I think that's about the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, I don't take my vacation. Well, then I'm not getting the very best of you. Period. Because if you don't take vacation, and I wish that would be something I could shift in the corporate culture where we could give 20, like people start, like when I lived in Europe, people started with 4 weeks vacation.
Yes.
It's so critical. And again, you want your people to be the best version of themselves, and so how are they taking rest? How are they getting inspired? How are they doing the different things if they're not taking time away? Because they're constantly trying to solve the same problem. And so they get into a rut, and that's how you kind of get stuck. I had a guy post on one of my Facebook things. He's like, the difference between a rut and a groove is really close, right? A rut is like you get stuck in the rut, but a groove, you're just, on autopilot. And so I think people tend to do that at times. So they get stuck in one of those two. And you got to figure out, how do you get out of that? Well, you got to be inspired, do fun stuff, think through that. So a lot of stuff out there.
Well, I've enjoyed it. I know we're nearing our time because our listeners' attention is Jake's been privately chatting us that we got to wrap it up. He
for sure
usually runs us there, Aaron. But I think we got through 2 of the questions. We said we're pretty loose and informal, but
yeah, no problem.
I'd love to continue conversations at some point, and it doesn't have to be in this format. It's just like some boundaries. I think people, maybe you've already talked. I haven't watched all the 19 episodes. I've caught a few and listened to them. I listen to podcasts when I'm on my free time of running, and yes, I'm trying to clear my head and get my free space. But boundaries are so important. How you do your work life. I like the word harmony. Everybody's balance is different. Find your balance. It's okay.
Yeah, you got to find it.
But man, I hope this is an inspirational episode. It's a little different than our normal episodes, but this is what we envisioned of. We want to talk with people like you. And yes, we work together. And I told you this when we talked about the podcast. This isn't about, let me bring Aaron on and, Central Garden and Pet is very important to us. They're a customer, but what's more important is the fact we got to meet Aron more today. And I think somebody's going to listen to this, and I think it's going to be an inspiration for them. And it may be somebody's one of the group that's on here listening. It may change that. It may be that little ripple in the pond that you never know what effect it has down the road. But I'm certainly inspired, and I've enjoyed it. And I know we've talked a whole lot, and Jordan's been as quiet as I've ever heard Jordan be quiet. He's tried to come off mute about 4 times. So Jordan, say something at least to know that you're on the episode.
Yeah, no, it's all good. It was a good conversation. So I have some thoughts, and I'll keep it quick. But Aron, one of our questions was around how you inspire people. But to me, it was evident through your stories and your passion for the betterment of those around you, your commitment to your family, your commitment to your career. I mean, I think that to me, it's self-explanatory. It's a compliment to you of your experience, and using that for the good of others, I think aligns well with our core purpose and what we believe in. And so it was just good conversation. So just listening and happy to be here.
Well, thanks guys for having me. I always enjoy sharing, because it helps me really think through, like, well, what is it that I'm about? And I think, to your point, Jordan, like when I looked at the question of like one of my mentors that I appreciated most, and I've had a bunch, it's one that I never ever doubted that they cared about me. Right? Her name was Liz Radke. So if she ever gets on this podcast, her name is Liz Radke, and she pushed me hard, like at points where I'm like, come on now, but I never doubted that she cared. And I always knew that she believed in me. And I think if we can authentically do that for the folks that we care about, like, that's all that matters, right? It's not, going above and beyond or trying to do something that's super cool. It's just be you and care. Be honest, give them feedback. I mean, people that work for me oftentimes will tell me I'm demanding, but they never doubt whether or not I care for them and for what we're trying to do. And that's what I try to do. And I'm just glad I had an opportunity to share and just hang out with you guys for a little bit this morning. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, we were glad to have you. You got any final comments, Drew?
No, just thanks for joining. I mean, it's been a blessing. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Drew.
Aron, thanks so much. So TZE audience, thanks for hanging with us, and we'll catch you on the next episode. We want to thank you all for listening to another episode of the Zion Experience. Please make sure you subscribe to our show on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcast. If you have any ideas or topics you'd love to hear about, or maybe for a future episode, please let us know. Send us something in the comments. We appreciate you all, and we'll see you here next time.